My wife lost her memory and forgot the last 15 years. I thought it was a chance to save our marriage. I was wrong. It was a chance to find out what a monster I really was. The words hung in the sterile air of St. Jude's, heavy and final. Retrograde amnesia, Mr. McCormick. The past 15 years. They're just gone. We don't know if she'll ever get them back. Dr. Evans, a man whose glasses perpetually slid down his nose, spoke with the practiced, detached empathy of someone who delivers bad news daily. He cleared his throat, adjusting his tie, a gesture I recognized as a universal sign for, "My work here is done. Good luck." Rachel lay on the hospital bed, a ghostly imitation of herself. Her auburn hair, usually a vibrant mess, was neatly fanned across the white pillow, almost blending in. Her eyes, open and tracking my movements, held a familiar blue, but it was clouded with a confusion I'd never seen before. It was the gaze of a child in an unfamiliar room, trusting but utterly lost. 15 years. That was everything. Our move from the small apartment in Queens to the house in Westchester. The years I built McCormick Construction from a beat-up pickup truck and a toolbox into a respectable outfit. Our trips to the Cape. The arguments, the silences, the shared jokes, the quiet evenings watching old movies. All of it wiped clean. A cold dread seeped into my bones, a familiar feeling from my younger, wilder days when a deal went south or a fight in a bar took an unexpected turn. But then, something else surfaced, bubbling up from a place I hadn't dared to look in years, a strange, almost illicit sense of relief. "We can fix this," I heard myself say, my voice rougher than I intended. Dr. Evans simply nodded, that same practiced, pitying nod. But he didn't understand. He saw tragedy. I saw opportunity. A twisted, dark opportunity, perhaps, but a chance nonetheless. I leaned closer to Rachel, gently taking her hand. It felt delicate, almost fragile in mine. "Hey, Rach," I whispered, forcing a smile that felt foreign on my lips. "It's me, Greg, your husband." She blinked slowly, her brow furrowing. "Greg," she repeated, tasting the name, like it was a new word in a new language. "My husband." There was no recognition, no spark, just a polite, bewildered acceptance. The Rachel I knew, the one who rolled her eyes at my bad jokes or squeezed my hand with an unspoken understanding, was gone. This Rachel, the one who remembered a time before the resentments had burrowed deep, was a blank slate. The doctor's pronouncement had been a sledgehammer to my world, but it had also, perversely, shattered the glass ceiling of our unspoken misery. For years, our marriage had been a carefully maintained facade, a silent agreement to coexist. We moved through the motions, the anniversary dinners, the holiday gatherings with family in Connecticut, the polite conversations about our days. But the warmth, the genuine connection, had withered, replaced by a quiet, simmering dissatisfaction that neither of us dared to acknowledge. I told myself it was just part of getting older, part of the routine. But deep down, I knew better. I knew we were just two ships passing in the night, moored to the same dock out of habit, not desire. Now that dock had been ripped away by a drunk driver on the I-95. As I sat there holding her hand, a dangerous thought took root. What if I could rebuild her memory, not as it actually was, but as I wanted it to be? What if I could erase the sour notes and play only the sweet melody of our early years? The years when we laughed easily, when a touch meant more than just acknowledgement, when her eyes sparkled whenever I walked into a room. The Rachel she remembered, the one from 15 years ago, was still in love with me. And the Rachel now, this vulnerable, innocent woman, had no reason to believe otherwise. A cold, hard knot formed in my stomach. This wasn't about her memory anymore. It was about my memory, my version of our story. I squeezed her hand tighter. "We're going to get you better, sweetheart," I said, my voice thick with a resolve that was less about healing and more about possession. "And we're going to remember everything. All the good times. Everything." I pictured the old photo albums gathering dust in the attic, the ones from the early days, filled with pictures of us, young and hopeful, before life had worn us down, before I had become me. I'd bring them to her. I'd tell her stories. I'd play our songs. I would curate her past, paint her a picture of a perfect marriage, a perfect love. And for a terrifying, exhilarating moment, I truly believed I could. I truly believed I could make her fall in love with me all over again. Or rather, that I could make her believe she never stopped. I saw myself as the hero of our story, saving our marriage from the wreckage of amnesia. The truth, as it always does, was waiting to hit me like another drunk driver. But I didn't know that then. All I knew was the faint scent of antiseptic and the fragile hand of a woman who was both my wife and a stranger, and the chilling, seductive whisper of a second chance. Bringing Rachel home was less like a homecoming and more like curating a museum exhibit. Every detail had to be perfect, a meticulously crafted stage for the narrative I was building. The hospital smell still clung to her clothes, a stark reminder of the trauma, but the moment the front door of our Westchester Colonial swung open, a different, more comforting aroma was supposed to greet her. A faint mix of cinnamon and fresh coffee, precisely what I remembered from our first Christmas morning in this house, 15 years ago. ID worked on it for days, while she was still in recovery. ID hauled down boxes from the attic, not the recent ones, but the ones labeled early years. Photo albums, old mix CDs from college, even a couple of framed concert posters from bands we'd seen in our 20s, banished to the garage for years, now strategically placed. The living room, usually a testament to understated adult practicality, was transformed. ID replaced the modern abstract art with an old landscape print Rachel had loved, pulled out a faded patchwork quilt for the sofa, and even bought a new set of ceramic mugs, identical to the ones we had used when we first moved in. I wanted her to step into a time capsule, a physical manifestation of the perfect love story I was determined to tell. "Welcome home, sweetheart," I'd said, guiding her gently through the door. Her eyes, wide and slightly dazed, scanned the familiar, unfamiliar surroundings. I watched her, holding my breath, searching for a flicker of recognition, a sign that the carefully constructed illusion was working. "It's nice," she murmured, her voice soft, almost hesitant. She walked slowly, touching the back of an armchair, running her fingers over the spine of a book on the shelf. The books, of course, were the ones she'd read back then, not the ones she'd devoured in recent years. I'd swapped them out, a minor deception in the grand scheme. "It feels warm. Warm." That was it. That was the feeling I was going for. I felt a surge of triumph. My plan was taking hold. She was responding. I was a goddamn architect of memory, building a better past, a better future. I was the hero, bringing her back to herself, back to us. We settled into a routine. I'd make her favorite breakfast from back then, pancakes with real maple syrup, just the way she liked them. We'd listen to the Eagles and Fleetwood Mac, bands that had soundtracked our youthful dreams rather than the classical piano she'd grown to love. I'd pull out the photo albums, carefully curating each page. Remember this, Rach? Our first trip to Niagara Falls? You almost fell in, laughing so hard. Or, that's your cousin Bethany's wedding. You cried, remember? Said it was the most beautiful thing you'd ever seen. She'd smile, a gentle, agreeable smile. I must have, she'd say, her eyes lingering on her younger, happier self in the glossy prints. You look so young. She'd often add, we both do. It was never, I remember, but always, I must have. A small, persistent pebble in my shoe. Sometimes, though, the carefully placed bricks in my memory wall would shift. One afternoon, I was excitedly pointing out a picture of our old, beaten-up Ford Explorer, the one we'd driven on every road trip. That old tank, I chuckled. Got us everywhere, didn't it? Remember that flat tire in Nevada? Rachel looked at the photo, then back at me, a faint crease between her brows. Did I really like road trips that much, Greg? She asked, her voice tinged with genuine curiosity. It's just, I feel like I'd rather just stay home, with a good book. A cold splash. I quickly recovered. Oh, sure you did, Rach. You loved the adventure. We had some of our best times on the open road. It was just your free spirit, I gave her an exaggerated wink, trying to conjure the image of a spontaneous, adventurous Rachel that I desperately needed her to believe in. The real Rachel, the one of the last 5 years, was indeed a homebody, happiest curled up with a novel. But that Rachel was the one I was trying to erase. Another time, I was trying to talk her into making a reservation at an old Italian place in Port Chester we used to frequent. Remember their lasagna? Your favorite? I enthused. She hesitated. Lasagna, I thought. I preferred the eggplant parmesan from that little place in Fairfield. My stomach clenched. Fairfield. That was near her old art class, the one she'd started taking last year. The one I'd always been too busy to pick her up from. Oh, that's later, sweetheart. Much later, I said, waving a dismissive hand. Before that, it was always Luigi's lasagna. Trust me. She nodded, but the look in her eyes was one of mild confusion, not conviction. It was as if she was politely humoring a slightly eccentric relative. My heroic narrative, so meticulously constructed, felt suddenly flimsy. She wasn't actively rejecting my stories, but she was not embracing them either. It was a passive resistance that chilled me more than any open defiance. I brushed these moments aside. Amnesia was tricky, I reasoned. She was bound to have some residual feelings, some echoes of the lost years. It didn't mean my memories were wrong, or that my efforts were in vain. It just meant I needed to try harder. I needed to be more convincing. If I just focused enough on the positive, on the us that I remembered, the rest would fall into place. It had to. One evening, while I was downstairs, humming along to an old song playing faintly, I heard a soft creak from the hallway upstairs. I glanced up. Rachel was standing there in the muted light, a slight, almost imperceptible tremor in her hand. She was looking at the old grandfather clock in the hall, a piece we'd inherited from my parents. It had stopped working years ago, but I'd kept it there for sentimental value. Do you know where my art supplies are? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. I feel like I used to paint. Did I? My heart did a little jolt. Art supplies. That was definitely from the lost years. Oh, not really, honey, I lied smoothly. You dabbled a bit, years and years ago, but you never really stuck with it. You were always more into photography, remember? I gestured vaguely towards an old camera ID placed on the mantelpiece. She looked at the camera, then back at the silent clock. A tiny frown appeared on her face, and for a fleeting moment, her eyes held a spark of something almost like a frustration, not with me, but with her own inability to grasp something just out of reach. She just shook her head, a quiet sigh escaping her lips, and slowly retreated back into our bedroom. Later that night, as I lay beside her, pretending to be asleep, the thought gnawed at me. Her old self, the one I was trying to resurrect, was a composite of my memories, my desires. But what if the person she truly was, the person she had become, was trying to break through? What if she was already struggling against the cage of my carefully crafted nostalgia? The doubt, like a persistent hum, began to resonate deeper within me. I was so busy building this idealized past for her, I hadn't considered that she might not want it, that she might be searching for something else entirely, something I was actively hiding. The uneasy silence of the house pressed in, a silent judge of my carefully constructed deception. I drifted off to sleep, not to the dreams of a loving husband, but to the faint, unsettling echo of a lie I was desperately trying to maintain. The fragile piece of my carefully constructed world began to crack, not with a bang, but with a whisper. We were in the living room, a Tuesday evening, watching one of those classic screwball comedies from the 40s. Bringing Up Baby, I think it was. Katharine Hepburn and Cary Grant, witty banter, a leopard named Baby. It was one of our early favorites, a shared laugh track for a simpler time. Rachel was curled up on the sofa, covered with the patchwork quilt ID resurrected, a faint smile playing on her lips. For a moment, I almost believed it. Almost believed we were back there, young and uncomplicated. Then, a scene flashed across the screen. Hepburn, flustered, reaching for her purse, and a brief, unmistakable glimpse of an old-fashioned flip phone, a Nokia, clutched in her hand. It was a blink-and-you-miss-it detail, an anachronism in the black-and-white world. But it was enough. Rachel stiffened. Her eyes, which had been softly following the characters, suddenly sharpened, widening slightly. She sat bolt upright, the quilt slipping from her shoulders. "Mark," she said, her voice a sudden sharp intake of breath. The name sliced through the comfortable quiet of the room like a shard of ice. It wasn't a question. It was a declaration. A memory. My blood ran cold. I froze. The remote control slipping from my grasp and clattering to the floor. "Mark," I repeated, my voice coming out as a strangled croak. Who's Mark, honey?" I racked my brain, frantically searching my memory banks for any Mark in our shared past. A distant cousin, an old college acquaintance. The name didn't ring a bell. Not one that I wanted to hear anyway. Her brow furrowed deeper, a frantic, confused look replacing the peaceful smile. She pressed her temples with her fingers, as if trying to push past a barrier in her mind. "Mark. He used to say that. About the phone. He said, 'Always answer, Rach. Always.'" She was breathing heavily now, a tremor running through her. It was a visceral, unbidden memory, stark and real, utterly detached from anything I had ever told her, and it pointed to a man I didn't know. A man who was clearly significant enough to trigger such a potent emotional response. Panic, cold and sharp, seized me. My carefully constructed reality began to warp and buckle. What the hell did she just say? This wasn't a little discrepancy about lasagna. This was a whole person, a name she remembered, a phrase he'd said to her, a man she had forgotten forgetting. Had I missed something? Was there a whole secret life buried beneath the surface of our perfect marriage? A life she was now reaching for, even in her amnesia. The thought was a bitter taste in my mouth, like ashes. I forced myself to stand, to move towards her, to act the concerned husband. "Honey, you're upset," I murmured, reaching for her hand. But she flinched, pulling away slightly, her eyes still distant, focused on something only she could see. I need to find it," she whispered, half to herself, half to me. I put it in the drawer. The one in my room, my old room. My old room. She meant her room. The one ID kept mostly untouched, a museum piece of her past, filled with the things I thought defined her. But clearly there was more than I knew. My jaw tightened. She stood up, her movements uncertain, and slowly made her way upstairs. I followed, keeping a discreet distance, my heart hammering against my ribs. The floorboards creaked under my feet, each sound amplified in the sudden tense silence. She entered the bedroom, the one that had been hers before our marriage slowly drifted into separate spaces, her reading nook, my workshop. It was the room I had carefully preserved, yet now it felt like a foreign country. She went straight to the old mahogany dresser, the one with the brass handles that always stuck a little. It was an antique she'd inherited from her grandmother, a piece I'd always found clunky and old-fashioned. She knelt, fumbling with the bottom drawer, pulling it open with a soft groan of protest. My breath hitched. From deep within, nestled beneath a pile of faded scarves and old lingerie, she pulled out a small, leather-bound book. It was dark green, with no discernible title, scuffed and worn at the edges. A diary. My stomach plummeted. A diary. A place where private thoughts, true thoughts, were kept. Thoughts she hadn't shared with me. She held it in her hands, turning it over, her fingers tracing the worn leather. Her expression was unreadable, a mix of recognition and bewilderment. She didn't open it. She just held it, a sacred, forbidden object. Then, as if the effort of remembering or the weight of the book was too much, she slowly, carefully put it back into the drawer, pushing it shut with a quiet click. She stood up, looking tired, and then without another word, moved towards the bed. "I'm just going to lie down for a bit, Greg," she said, her voice faint. "My head, it hurts." I mumbled something incoherent, a strained, "Of course, honey." I watched her slip under the covers, her back to me. The green diary now hidden once more. A dark secret buried within the mahogany. I stood there for a long time, the silence stretching taut around me. The thought of that diary, with its unknown contents, burned a hole in my mind. What was in there? What truths did it hold? What secrets had my wife kept from me? And more disturbingly, what secrets had I kept from myself? I paced the hallway, the floorboards groaning under my restless weight. Sleep was impossible. My carefully constructed edifice of our perfect past was crumbling, not because of some external force, but from an internal tremor, a memory that Rachel herself had summoned. The mark she remembered was a ghost, a phantom of the forgotten years. But ghosts, I knew from my past, sometimes had a way of refusing to stay buried. The desire, no, the need to know, became unbearable. I had to see it. I had to understand what she had hidden, what I had so spectacularly failed to see. The very foundation of my marriage, of my identity as her loving husband, felt like it was resting on quicksand. Long past midnight, when the house was utterly silent, save for the hum of the refrigerator and the gentle tick of the antique clock in the hall, which I had meticulously fixed, another detail for my narrative, I couldn't take it anymore. I tiptoed into the bedroom, my movements as quiet as a phantom's. Rachel's breathing was soft and even, deep in sleep. I knelt beside the dresser, my fingers fumbling with the stubborn brass handle of the bottom drawer. It groaned open. My heart pounded in my chest, a frantic drumbeat against the silence. I found the pile of scarves, moved them aside, and there it was, the dark green diary. I pulled it out, my hands trembling slightly. The leather felt cool, almost alive in my grasp. A faint scent of old paper and something else, something sweet and floral, Rachel's scent, wafted up. I held it for a moment, the weight of it feeling immense. This was it, the key to the last 15 years, the real story. I took a deep breath, the air suddenly thick and cold. I opened the diary. The first page was dated 5 years ago. I began to read. The kitchen, usually the warmest room in the house, felt like a walk-in freezer. The fluorescent light above the sink cast a harsh, unforgiving glow on the diary open on the worn oak table. Midnight had bled into early morning, and the world outside was still swallowed by darkness. My hands, usually calloused and steady from years of handling tools and negotiating deals, trembled as I turned the brittle pages. The first few entries were innocuous enough, mundane observations about the weather, a recipe for a new kind of soup, a neighbor, a sprawling hydrangeas. I breathed a small sigh of relief. See, Greg, nothing. Just her being Rachel. Your Rachel. But then the tone shifted, subtly at first, like a barely perceptible change in the wind. A comment about feeling a little restless. A note about another quiet evening. My initial relief began to curdle into a vague unease. This wasn't the happy-go-lucky Rachel I was trying to recreate. This was introspective and a little sad. August the 12th, 5 years ago. The date seemed to jump off the page. Another anniversary dinner. Same restaurant, same small talk. Greg was distracted again, checking his phone under the table. Said it was a big deal with a new client. I just smiled and nodded. What else is there to do? Sometimes I feel like I'm talking to a ghost, or maybe I am the ghost. My breath hitched, distracted, checking my phone. I remembered that dinner. I told myself I was dedicated, building our future. She saw it as indifference, the first tremor. I read on, my eyes scanning the elegant, flowing script, a stark contrast to the brutal honesty of the words. Each sentence was a tiny shard of glass, pricking at the carefully constructed image of my marriage. September 5th, he barely noticed my new haircut. Just a grunt. Looks good, Rach. He used to notice everything, used to run his hands through my hair and tell me I was beautiful. Now it feels like I'm invisible. Just another piece of furniture in the house. Invisible. The word echoed in the silent kitchen, a condemnation. I remembered that haircut. I'd been rushing out the door, late for a meeting. A grunt. Looks good, Rach. It was true. I hadn't really looked. I was too busy with McCormick Construction, with the pressures of maintaining our comfortable life in Westchester. I told myself it was for us. She saw it as neglect. The entries grew darker, more despairing. There was no histrionics, no melodrama. Just a quiet, aching sadness that seeped from every line. It was the voice of a woman slowly suffocating, and I, her husband, had been oblivious. Or worse, willfully blind. October 20th. He asked me what I wanted for my birthday. I said, "For you to really look at me, Greg, just once." He laughed, said I was being dramatic. He bought me that pearl necklace. It's beautiful, but it's not what I wanted, the pearl necklace. I remembered it perfectly. A substantial piece, expensive, from Tiffany's. I thought I was being generous, thoughtful. I thought I was providing. I thought I was a good husband. She saw it as a substitute for connection, a payment for silence. The sense of dread grew, a cold, hard knot in my gut. This wasn't a story about a few rough patches. This was a systematic dismantling of everything I believed our marriage to be. And then the name appeared again. November 1st, art class. It's the only place I feel like myself anymore. Like I can breathe. Mark was there again. He saw the new painting, said it captured something raw and beautiful. He actually saw it. He actually saw me. Mark. My blood ran cold again. He wasn't just a fleeting memory, a random name. He was a presence, a man who saw her, truly saw her, when I clearly didn't. The anger, sharp and hot, tried to ignite, but it was quickly doused by a more potent, unsettling realization. She was drawn to him because of me, because of what I had become. The entries about Mark became more frequent, more intimate. They talked about art, about books, about dreams, about the things Rachel had clearly tried to share with me, only to be met with my indifference or dismissiveness. He listened. He understood. He made her laugh. He made her feel alive. December 10th. I think I am falling in love with him. I know it. It's wrong. I feel married to Greg. But I feel like I'm finally myself again. The girl I was before. Before everything became so heavy, the words blurred before my eyes. Falling in love with him, not me, not the man she was trying to remember. The man she was actively trying to forget. The man she hated. I gripped the diary tighter, my knuckles white. A furious, jealous heat surged through me, but it was quickly overshadowed by a wave of crushing shame. This wasn't just about her betrayal. It was about my failure. I had driven her to this. I, Greg McCormick, the steady, reliable, successful husband, had systematically dismantled my wife's happiness, piece by agonizing piece. She had planned to leave me. The entries in the final months leading up to the accident were unequivocal. She was saving money, looking for an apartment, discussing future plans with Mark. Her intention was clear, precise, and utterly devastating. She was gone long before the accident. The accident had simply erased the memory of her departure, leaving her trapped in a marriage she had already escaped. I closed the diary, the sound a small, sickening thud in the silent kitchen. My hand was shaking so badly, I almost dropped it. The fluorescent light suddenly felt blinding, exposing every flaw, every crack in the facade I had built for years, for decades. The man I thought I was, the loving husband, the provider, the stable presence, was a fiction, a monstrous lie, the aroma of cinnamon and coffee, The very sense I had tried to conjure to evoke a perfect past now felt like a cruel mockery. They were the scents of a lie, of a carefully constructed deception, of a happiness that was never real for her. I walked to the kitchen window, staring out at the inky blackness. A faint sliver of dawn was just beginning to paint the horizon, promising a new day. But for me, the world had just turned inside out. The woman sleeping upstairs, the one I was diligently trying to make fall in love with me again, was a stranger. And the man I saw reflected faintly in the dark glass of the window, with his tired eyes and hollow expression, was even more so. I thought I was giving her a second chance. I thought I was her rescuer, but in fact, I was her jailer, trapping her in a gilded cage she had desperately tried to escape. And now, armed with the horrifying truth, I had to look at myself. Really look, and I didn't like what I saw. Not one damn bit. The first rays of dawn, usually a herald of renewed purpose, felt like an interrogation lamp. I stood in the bathroom, staring into the mirror above the sink, a stranger staring back. The man in the reflection was Greg McCormick, the solid, dependable contractor, the guy who could fix anything, the pillar of the community. But my eyes, usually a calm, steady gray, were bloodshot and haunted. The lines around them, once symbols of laugh lines or hard-earned wisdom, now looked like etchings of worry, regret, and something colder. Self-disgust, invisible, trapped, talking to a ghost. I'm falling in love with him. Rachel, as words from the diary hammered in my skull, a relentless, damning rhythm. They weren't just words on a page anymore. They were a chisel, systematically chipping away at my self-perception. I always thought of myself as a good man, a hard-working man. I provided, I protected, I never raised a hand, never cheated, never outwardly abused her. My sins, ID always believed, were of omission, not commission. Busyness, ambition, a little too much focus on the next big contract. Harmless, right? The necessary evils of building a comfortable life. But reading her diary, I saw myself through her eyes, through the lens of her quiet despair. And the image was monstrous. A controlling, emotionally distant, self-absorbed man who took her for granted, who turned a blind eye to her needs, who dismissed her dreams and desires with a casual wave of his hand. I saw the indifference that she perceived as contempt, the silences that she heard as judgment, the well-intentioned gifts that she interpreted as bribes for her silence. "You really are a piece of work, McCormick," I muttered to the reflection, my voice rough, unfamiliar. The Greg McCormick I thought I knew, the one who was going to save his marriage, was a carefully constructed fiction. The real Greg McCormick had slowly, insidiously, stifled the woman he'd sworn to love, pushing her into the arms of another man. And the worst part, I hadn't even known. I'd been so wrapped up in my own narrative, my own version of success, that I had completely failed to see the vibrant, loving woman I was slowly crushing. The shame was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. How could I have been so blind, so arrogant, so utterly, profoundly wrong? I remembered countless small moments, snippets of conversations, fleeting expressions on her face that I had rationalized away. Her quiet withdrawal, her increasingly solitary walks, the way she would sometimes stare out the window with a faraway look in her eyes. I had always attributed it to her being tired or preoccupied. Now, I knew. She was escaping. She was dreaming of a life without me. The irony was brutal. I had spent weeks meticulously recreating a past for her, a past where we were happy, where I was the hero. And now she was trapped in that past, believing in a loving husband who, in reality, was the very source of her deepest unhappiness. The amnesia, which I had welcomed as a second chance, was in fact a cruel perpetration of her suffering. I was forcing her to live the lie she had almost managed to escape. I splashed cold water on my face, trying to wash away the disgust, but it clung to me like a shroud. I glanced at the closed bathroom door. Rachel was still asleep in our bed, oblivious to the earthquake that had just torn through her husband's soul. She would wake up expecting her kind, loving Greg, the man from 15 years ago, and I would have to play the part. The thought was nauseating. I walked back into the bedroom, my movements heavy, each step a conscious effort. Rachel was still asleep, her face serene, almost childlike in its innocence. She looked so peaceful, so vulnerable. The impulse to shake her, to scream the truth, to confess everything, surged through me. But what good would it do? It would shatter her fragile recovery, throw her back into a world of pain and confusion she couldn't comprehend. She didn't remember the hurt, the resentment, the betrayal. She remembered only the love that I was carefully constructing for her. My role had shifted. I was no longer the rescuer, orchestrating a happy reunion. I was the keeper of a terrible secret, a silent actor in a play I had unwittingly co-written. Now forced to follow a script I detested. The man I had once been, the man I tried to resurrect, was dead. But the man in the diary, the monster, was very much alive, staring back at me from the mirror, and now, from the hollow pit of my stomach. I knew I couldn't tell her. Not yet, anyway. Maybe never. But the question remained, what would I do with this knowledge? How could I continue to be the loving husband when I knew the truth of her misery, of her plans to leave? The forced smiles, the feigned tenderness, the carefully chosen anecdotes, they would all feel like poison on my tongue. And then there was Mark, the phantom lover, the man who saw her, who made her happy, the man who, by all accounts, was her genuine love. Would he appear? Was he still looking for her? The thought sent a jolt of ice through my veins, mixing with the shame. If he did, what would I do? Confront him? Protect her from him? Or protect her from me? The weight of the diary, still hidden in the bottom drawer, felt immense. A silent judge. My perfect marriage was a lie, and now I was trapped within it, a prisoner of my own making, forced to play the part of a loving husband to a woman who had, for good reason, fallen out of love with me. The irony was so bitter it almost made me laugh, a hollow, mirthless sound that died in my throat. I sat on the edge of the bed, watching her peaceful, unsuspecting face. My past, which I thought I had erased for her, was now demanding its reckoning. And the hardest part was knowing that the monster I saw in the mirror was not some stranger, but me. All me. Every single selfish, oblivious, controlling facet of the man Rachel McCormick had grown to despise. The morning after my diary discovery was a masterclass in controlled performance. Every interaction with Rachel felt like a scene from a play, meticulously rehearsed and delivered with practiced ease. But inside, I was a coiled spring of anxiety and self-loathing. I served her breakfast, forced a cheerful conversation about the news, and even suggested a walk in the park, all the while feeling like a charlatan, a villain in my own story. Rachel, bless her oblivious heart, seemed to pick up on none of it. Her amnesia, in its cruelty, had gifted her a fragile innocence, a clean slate. She smiled, she laughed at my jokes, she held my hand as we walked, just as I had pictured in my reconstructed reality. But every gesture, every touch, was now laced with an undercurrent of bitter truth for me. When she looked at me with those trusting blue eyes, I saw not love, but a reflection of my own monstrous deception. The immediate problem, however, was not my internal turmoil, but the very real, very present threat of Mark. The diary had painted him as a genuine, loving presence in her life. What if he was still out there, searching for her? What if he found her? The thought sent a jolt of icy fear through me. Not fear of losing her. I had already lost her years ago. But fear of the inevitable explosion of truth, the shattering of her fragile recovery, and the complete exposure of my own deceit. I had to know more. I couldn't just wait for him to appear. I needed to control the narrative, to understand the landscape of her secret life. My first target, her old phone. It was an older model, a smartphone that predated her accident by a couple of years, tucked away in a bedside drawer that I'd been too respectful to rummage through. Now, respect was a luxury I couldn't afford. That afternoon, while Rachel was napping, exhausted by her daily physical therapy exercises, I slipped into the bedroom. My heart pounded like a drum against my ribs. I found the phone. It was dead, of course. She hadn't used it in weeks. I plugged it into a charger, the screen slowly flickering to life. The lock screen flashed a picture of Rachel, not with me, but alone, laughing, her hair wind-swept. A small, almost imperceptible detail, but it twisted the knife deeper. Not a photo of us, just her, happy. I remembered her old passcode, an anniversary date, an inside joke. It worked. The screen burst open, a deluge of apps, texts, emails. My breath hitched. This was it, the window into her lost years, the digital ghost of her true life. I navigated through the apps, feeling like a trespasser in her soul. I checked her texts first, then her emails. My fingers trembled. There it was, a string of conversations, dating back months before the accident, with a contact simply labeled MM. My stomach churned. The messages were warm, intimate, filled with shared jokes, thoughtful observations about art, a frequent topic, and longing. Miss you already, Rach. That new exhibit was incredible, but not as incredible as watching you light up while talking about it, and counting the days until we can grab that coffee. Just hearing your voice makes my day. There were even plans for a weekend trip, a quiet getaway before everything changes. The everything changes was undoubtedly her plan to leave me. I scrolled through, each message a hammer blow to my pride, my carefully constructed denial. Mark. He was real. He was more than real. He was a vibrant, present force in her life. His number was there, bold and undeniable. I copied it down, my hand shaking. Then I saw a folder labeled Photos, Mark. I clicked on it, bracing myself, and there he was, a man younger than me, probably late 40s, with kind eyes, a slight smile, and a thoughtful, artistic air. Not a threat, not a brute, just a decent-looking man. A man who looked like he genuinely cared about Rachel. Pictures of them together, laughing over coffee, strolling through a park, even one of him holding her hand, his thumb gently caressing her knuckles. the same tense gesture I used to make years ago. A wave of impotent rage washed over me, quickly followed by a cold, hard dread. This was no fleeting affair. This was a deep, emotional connection. This man truly loved her. And she, by all accounts, truly loved him back. Suddenly, the bedroom door creaked open. Rachel stood there, her eyes blinking sleepily. "Greg." "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice soft, confused. I slammed the phone shut, nearly dropping it. My heart leapt into my throat. "Just, cleaning it for you, sweetheart," I stammered, forcing a laugh that sounded hollow even to my own ears. It was dead. Thought I'd charge it up, get it ready for when you know, remember how to use it again. I tried to appear casual, but my hands were shaking. She looked at me, a faint frown on her face. Her eyes narrowed slightly, a spark of something almost like suspicion in their depths. "Oh, okay," she said slowly. "Thank you, I guess." She lingered for a moment, then yawned. "I think I'll just get some water." She turned and walked out. My facade had cracked. She noticed. She sensed something was off. My loving husband act, so carefully maintained, was already starting to crumble under the weight of my own discoveries. I was trapped, not just by my past, but by the present lie I was actively weaving. I knew I couldn't just ignore Mark. He was a living, breathing component of the truth I was desperately trying to bury. What if he called? What if he came to the house? The thought was terrifying. Not for me, not anymore. For her. Her fragile, reconstructed reality. I had to confront him. I had to understand what he knew, what he expected. I had to control the situation, to prevent the inevitable collision of her two worlds. My pride demanded it. My twisted sense of responsibility to her demanded it. And a deeper, darker part of me, the part that had been so easily blinded by ambition and self-absorption, needed to see the man who had effortlessly succeeded where I had so spectacularly failed. The next day, armed with Mark's number and a burning resolve, I began my search. This wasn't about saving a marriage anymore. This was about navigating a minefield of lies, a treacherous path where every step could lead to utter destruction. For Rachel, and for the monster, Greg McCormick, who had brought her there. I had to confront the ghost of her love. And I had to do it before he stumbled upon her himself. The game, I realized with a chilling certainty, had only just begun. The morning after finding Mark's number, a strange clarity settled over me. The emotional whirlwind of anger and self-pity began to dissipate, replaced by a cold, calculating resolve. This was familiar territory, in a twisted way. Years ago, building McCormick Construction from nothing, AID learned how to identify a problem, gather intelligence, and execute a plan. This was no different. Just the stakes were infinitely higher, and the currency wasn't profit, but truth. Rachel was making progress with her physical therapy, but she still needed assistance getting around. That morning, ID arranged for a home healthcare aide, Mrs. Henderson, a kind, no-nonsense woman from Stamford, to stay with her for a few hours. This gave me the window I needed. I told Rachel I had some urgent business at the office, a credible lie that barely registered with her. I pulled out Mark's number. His name wasn't common, but it wasn't unique enough to simply Google. However, the texts had referenced an art gallery, the Gilded Frame, in Greenwich, where he'd apparently helped curate a show. A quick search revealed it was a legitimate gallery, not far from Westchester, known for showcasing local artists. And then, a small detail from one of Rachel's texts to Mark. Can't wait for our coffee at the Daily Grind after your Tuesday meeting. Today was Tuesday. My old pickup truck, a Ford F-150 I still used for heavy hauls, felt like a hunter. Vehicle, as I drove south on I-95, leaving the manicured lawns of Westchester behind for the more commercial bustle of Greenwich Avenue. I parked a few blocks away from the gallery, putting on a baseball cap and a pair of sunglasses, a habit from a life I mostly kept buried. I might look like a regular guy running errands, but my senses were on high alert. I wasn't just observing, I was scouting. The gilded frame was exactly as I pictured, tastefully minimalist, with large plate glass windows displaying vibrant modern art. I watched for a while, seeing patrons come and go, but no Mark. Then, I found the Daily Grind, a trendy-looking coffee shop with outdoor seating just a block from the gallery. Perfect. I settled into my truck, pretending to fiddle with paperwork, my eyes glued to the entrance of the coffee shop. The minutes dragged, each tick of the clock amplifying the tension in my chest. I scanned every face, every man who looked to be in his late 40s or early 50s. My initial emotions, the gut-wrenching jealousy, the burning sense of betrayal, had hardened into a cold, clinical focus. I needed to see him, to assess him, the enemy, the rival, the man who had made my wife truly happy. And then he appeared. He walked out of the gallery, not looking like a typical art dealer. He was dressed in casual slacks and a well-fitting but unpretentious collared shirt. He wasn't overtly handsome, but there was a quiet confidence in his stride, a thoughtful intensity in his eyes as he glanced around. He carried a messenger bag slung across his chest, and his dark hair was streaked with gray, giving him an air of seasoned maturity. He was exactly what Rachel's diary entries described: thoughtful, perceptive, kind. And God help me, he looked decent. He ordered a coffee inside, then took a seat at one of the outdoor tables, pulling out a small notebook and a pen. He was sketching, oblivious to the man watching him from a beat-up pickup truck. He had a natural grace, an ease in his own skin that I realized, with a sickening jolt, I had long since lost. He wasn't flashy. He wasn't demanding. He simply was. And Rachel, in her own words, had been drawn to that authenticity like a moth to a flame. A wave of bitter envy washed over me, stronger than any rage. He represented everything I wasn't, everything I had failed to be for Rachel. He was the listener, the observer, the man who nurtured her artistic soul, not just her material comfort. He gave her attention, not just money. He gave her himself, not just his presence. My initial thought, a raw, primal urge, was to march over there, slam my fist on his table and demand answers, to expose him, to humiliate him, to show him the power of Greg McCormick. But then, my cooler, more strategic mind kicked in. That wouldn't accomplish anything. It would just make a scene, potentially compromise Rachel's fragile state, and confirm everything he likely already suspected about me. It would be an emotional outburst, not a calculated move. And I wasn't an emotional outburst kind of guy anymore, not when it truly mattered. I watched him finish his coffee, neatly pack away his notebook, and then head back towards the gallery. He was gone, leaving behind a lingering sense of my own inadequacy, but also a new, unsettling clarity. Mark wasn't a caricature of a homewrecker. He was a man who, by all accounts, genuinely loved my wife. This wasn't just a simple affair. It was a profound connection, built on the very foundation of my own failures. I needed to meet him, not as a wronged husband demanding answers, but as a concerned party, a man navigating an impossible situation. I needed to gauge him, to understand his intentions, to control the flow of information. I needed to play a part, just as I was playing one for Rachel. The hidden strength, the shrewdness ID cultivated in the rough-and-tumble world of construction, the ability to read people and situations, I would need all of it. I pulled out my phone. Mark's number was still there. I couldn't just call him out of the blue. That would be too direct, too confrontational. I needed a reason, a plausible scenario, something that would allow me to observe, to probe, to set the terms of our encounter. My mind raced, sifting through possibilities. What would a concerned relative do? A concerned brother, perhaps, reaching out. That felt right. A subtle lie, another thread in the intricate web I was weaving. I drove back towards Westchester, the sun now high in the sky, illuminating the familiar landscape that now felt utterly alien. The monster in the mirror was still there, but he was learning. He was adapting. He was becoming something else entirely. A strategist, a manipulator, operating in a moral gray zone I never thought I'd inhabit. The game had truly begun, and I knew, with a chilling certainty, that I had to win it, for Rachel's sake, and for whatever twisted sense of justice I now sought. My phone rang. It was Mrs. Henderson, the aide. "Mr. McCormick," she said, her voice bright. "Rachel's awake and asking for you. She's just finished her lunch and says she wants to look at those old photo albums again." I forced a smile, a practiced reflex. "Tell her I'll be home soon, Mrs. Henderson. Just wrapping things up." I hung up, the smile fading from my face. Photo albums. Lies. The deception was now a constant living thing, and I was its unwilling master. The time had come to face Mark. I needed to meet Mark, but on my terms. Not an ambush, not a confrontation, but a conversation engineered to my advantage. I wasn't a hothead anymore. Not after decades of dealing with crooked suppliers, disgruntled workers, and zoning board officials. You learn to play the long game. You learn that quiet words often carry more weight than shouting. My first thought was to impersonate someone else, but that was too risky, too easy to unravel. No, the truth, or a version of it, would be my weapon. I called Mark's gallery the next morning, my voice calm, professional, almost detached. "Hello, my name is Greg McCormick. I believe you know my wife, Rachel." I paused, letting the words hang in the air, a silent bomb. There was a beat of silence on the other end, a sharp intake of breath, then a carefully modulated voice deeper than I expected. "Mr. McCormick, yes, I do. Is she all right? I've been trying to reach her." His voice held genuine concern, not just surprise. Another twist of the knife for me. "She's been in an accident, Mark," I said, keeping my tone even, devoid of emotion. "A pretty bad car accident. She's home now, recovering, but she sustained a head injury, retrograde amnesia. She doesn't remember the last 15 years. Another silence, longer this time. I could almost hear his mind racing, trying to process the bombshell. "Oh my God," he finally breathed out, the concern now laced with shock. I had no idea. I just thought..." She'd stopped responding. "She has no memory of you, Mark," I continued, pressing the advantage, laying out the brutal truth. Or of your relationship. She only remembers me, from before, as her husband. The silence on the other end was deafening. This was the moment, the pivot. I think it would be beneficial for us to talk, I said, my voice softening just a fraction, hinting at a shared burden. Away from Rachel, of course, for her sake, to understand how best to navigate this delicate situation, for her recovery. He agreed. He suggested a quiet coffee shop in Fairfield, far enough from either of our usual haunts, a neutral territory. The Daily Grind, I realized with a grim smile, the same place he met Rachel. He'd unwittingly picked the arena of his own potential undoing. I knew the area well. Knew the back alleys, the escape routes, the quiet corners. An old dog never forgets his territory. I arrived at the Daily Grind first, choosing a table in the back, obscured from the main entrance, yet with a clear view of anyone approaching. I ordered a black coffee, a bitter taste for a bitter meeting. I sat there, observing the other patrons, the rhythm of the place, letting my mind settle into the strategic calm I used to summon before a big negotiation. I might look like an aging contractor nursing a coffee, but inside, I was a coiled viper. Mark walked in exactly 5 minutes after our agreed time. Punctual, respectful. My first read was confirmed. He wasn't a predator. He was simply a man who had fallen in love. He scanned the room, his eyes filled with a weary apprehension. He found me, and for a fleeting moment, his face registered surprise, then a flicker of recognition from my earlier stakeout. My baseball cap and sunglasses were gone, but my eyes were the same. He walked over, extended a hand. His grip was firm, but not aggressive. "Greg McCormack," he said, his voice measured. "Mark Jensen. Thank you for meeting me." "Sit down, Mark," I replied, gesturing to the opposite chair. My eyes locked onto his. I wanted him to understand, without a single word, that I held all the cards. Or at least I was about to. We started with pleasantries, a strained dance around the obvious. He expressed his shock about Rachel, his accident, his genuine sorrow. He asked about her prognosis, her therapy. I answered vaguely, keeping my information to a minimum. I wanted him to talk. I wanted him to reveal his hand. I was worried when she stopped responding, Mark finally admitted, his gaze dropping to his hands, which were clasped tightly on the table. Her phone was off for days. I just figured something was wrong, or that she had changed her mind about us. He looked up, his eyes meeting mine, raw and exposed. "She was going to leave you, Greg." The bluntness of it, the simple, devastating truth, hit me like a punch to the gut. Even though I read it, hearing it from him, articulated so plainly, was a different kind of pain. My jaw tightened. "I know," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I found her diary." His eyes widened, a flash of surprise, then understanding, then a deep, settling sadness. "Ah," he said, a quiet exhalation. "So you know everything." "Everything," I confirmed, my gaze unwavering. "About your relationship, about her unhappiness, about her plans to leave." I watched him closely, searching for any sign of artifice, of self-serving lies, but there was none. Just a man sitting across from me, exposed and vulnerable. Then, a subtle shift. Mark leaned forward, his voice low, earnest. "I never wanted to hurt her, Greg. Or you, she was so unhappy. And I loved her. I still do." She told me, she told me your marriage was over long before I ever came into the picture. She said you were emotionally unavailable, that you didn't see her, that you didn't care. His words echoed the diary entries, a cruel mirror reflecting my own monstrous truth. I felt a flicker of the old anger, the reflexive defensiveness, but it was quickly extinguished by a deeper, more profound sense of shame. He was right. She was right. She said, "You were changing, that you were trying," Mark continued, his voice softer now, almost pleading, "that she was giving you one last chance. But then she met me, and I guess that was it. Changing. Trying." I racked my brain. Had I ever really tried? Or had I just been going through the motions, expecting her to be grateful for the comfortable life I provided? The answer, bitter and undeniable, was clear. I hadn't changed. I had doubled down on my self-absorption, my belief that she owed me something for my hard work. I looked at Mark, this man who had loved my wife so genuinely, so completely, that she had been willing to leave everything behind for him. He was not a villain. He was a good man, caught in a complicated web, and he was suffering too. He had lost the woman he loved, twice over, once to my marriage, and now to amnesia. My strategic brain, the one that built bridges and closed deals, began to work overtime. This wasn't a zero-sum game anymore. This was a fragile ecosystem with Rachel at its center, and my actions, my choices had ramifications that stretched far beyond my own bruised ego. "So what now, Greg?" Mark asked, breaking the silence, his eyes fixed on mine. He wasn't asking for a fight. He was asking for a path forward. I took a slow sip of my bitter coffee, the taste a fitting accompaniment to the complexity of the moment. I had come here prepared for battle, ready to assert my claim, to protect my lie. But looking at Mark, seeing his genuine pain, hearing the echo of Rachel's words, my perspective had irrevocably shifted. The choice was no longer about revenge or control. It was about something far more profound, justice, and perhaps even redemption. But what did that even look like in this tangled mess of broken memories and shattered truths? My chessboard had just become infinitely more complicated. The air in the daily grind felt heavy, thick with unspoken truths, and the ghost of a love story I was only now beginning to understand. Mark's question, "So what now, Greg?" hung between us, demanding an answer I wasn't entirely sure I had. My carefully constructed battle plan, born of rage and wounded pride, had crumbled the moment I saw his genuine pain, his open honesty. He wasn't a villain. He was another casualty of my own blind self-absorption. I studied him, truly studied him, not as a rival, but as a mirror reflecting a version of myself I could have been, should have been, for Rachel. He was softer, more attuned, less burdened by the relentless drive for success that had consumed me. He was the man who truly saw her, when I had only seen a reflection of my own desires. "What now?" I repeated, my voice low, almost contemplative. That's the question, isn't it? I took another sip of my black coffee, its bitterness a fitting accompaniment to the complexity of the moment. "I came here, Mark, expecting a fight, expecting to, well, to intimidate you, to warn you off." I watched his face, gauging his reaction. He didn't flinch, just a slight, weary nod. "But then you started talking, and I realized you loved her. You truly did." He didn't deny it. He just looked down at his hands, a faint blush rising on his cheeks. "More than anything," he murmured. She still is." everything to me. The honesty was disarming. It pricked at the last vestiges of my self-righteous indignation. I thought of Rachel, back at the house, her fragile smile, her confused eyes. She was finally peaceful, devoid of the deep unhappiness that had been her constant companion for years. Was it right to rip that away from her, to expose her to a truth that would only bring her more pain, more confusion? My internal monologue was a battleground. She betrayed you, Greg. She planned to leave. She deserves to know the truth of her own choices. But then, a quiet, insistent voice, one I hadn't listened to in years, whispered back, "But you drove her to it. You were the one who made her unhappy. You were the monster in her story, not him." The words from her diary, those brutal, honest confessions of feeling invisible, trapped, talking to a ghost, echoed in my mind. She hadn't been malicious. She'd been desperate. She hadn't sought to wound me. She had sought to survive. She had found solace and then love in the arms of a man who offered her the very things I had so carelessly withheld. I looked up, meeting Mark, his gaze again. "She's happy now, Mark," I said, the words heavy on my tongue. Or she's at peace. She doesn't remember the pain. She doesn't remember us, the broken parts. She only remembers a time when she believed we were happy. And she believes I'm the man she loved. Mark's face was a study in profound sorrow. He understood the implication. "So, I should just disappear?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "Let her live a lie?" The question hung in the air, a moral dilemma of impossible proportions. My old self would have said, "Absolutely. She's my wife. She made her bed. Now she lies in it, with me." But the man who had read that diary, the man who had truly looked in the mirror, couldn't say that. Not anymore. "I don't know," I admitted, the raw honesty surprising even myself. "I really don't know. All I know is that right now, her fragile recovery is paramount. Any shock, any sudden jolt, it could set her back irreparably, or worse. She's starting from zero, Mark. And the truth, our truth, is a complicated, painful mess." I leaned forward, my voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, a faint echo of the strategic negotiator I once was, but now infused with a new, raw humanity. I read her diary, every painful word. I know what I did to her, how I pushed her away, how I drove her into your arms. I don't blame her. I blame myself. It was the hardest admission ID ever made, a confession that stripped me bare. Mark just looked at me, his eyes wide with surprise, perhaps even a flicker of pity. "Greg, I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything." I cut him off, a new resolve hardening my voice. "Just listen. She doesn't remember me as the man who made her unhappy. She remembers the younger me, the one she loved. And I am trying, truly trying, to be that man again, to build something new, something real, with this new, fragile Rachel." I paused, looking him dead in the eye. "But I also know that she loved you, Mark, deeply, and you loved her. And if her memory ever returns, if she ever truly remembers, then I will step aside. I will. For her happiness. That's a promise." It was a staggering concession, a complete surrender of my pride, my perceived ownership. It felt like tearing a piece of my own flesh, but it was the only way, the only path to a semblance of integrity, to a chance at atonement. I wouldn't fight for a broken past. I would only fight for her future. Mark stared at me, a myriad of emotions playing across his face, Shock, relief, sorrow, respect. You would do that? He asked, his voice hushed. I have to, I said, a weary sigh escaping my lips. Because I realize now that love isn't about possession, Mark. It's about wanting what's best for the other person, even if that means it's not with you. And right now, what's best for Rachel is peace and a chance to heal without the baggage of our collective mess. So what do you want me to do? He asked. The question was not challenging, but genuinely seeking guidance. For now, I said, my voice firm, nothing. Disappear. Let her heal. Give her space. If she remembers you on her own, if she seeks you out, then that's a different story. But until then, you stay away, for her sake. It was a plea, not a demand. He nodded slowly, taking it all in. Okay, he said, his voice thick with emotion. For Rachel, I understand. He stood up, a new kind of respect in his eyes. Thank you, Greg, for your honesty, for telling me. I just nodded, my eyes fixed on his retreating figure. He walked out of the daily grind, a ghost disappearing into the bustling Fairfield streets. And I was left alone, in the silence of my own confession, with a truth that was both liberating and utterly devastating. I had just relinquished my claim to my wife's heart, not to a rival, but to the principle of her own happiness. The chessboard was still in play, but I had just made the most difficult move of my life. And the real game, the one for my own soul, was just beginning. The walk back to my truck from the daily grind felt different. The air, usually just air, tasted sharper. The sounds of traffic, once just background noise, seemed to carry a clearer message. I had just made the hardest decision of my life, one that went against every instinct of a man accustomed to fighting for what was his. And the strange thing was, it felt right. Not good, not happy, but right. A profound, unsettling peace had settled in the raw space where my anger and self-deception had once resided. I got into the truck, the worn leather seat feeling familiar and grounding. I pulled out my phone. Mark's number was still there, but now it held a different meaning. Not a threat, but a testament to a shared, painful understanding. I debated deleting it, then decided against it. It was a reminder, a marker of the path I had just chosen. Driving home, I thought about Rachel, about her serene face, her fragile new beginning. The decision to shield her from the brutal truth of her past, to allow her this manufactured peace, was a heavy burden. I was condemning myself to a life of quiet deception, of playing a part, knowing that the woman I was trying to win back might not want me if she truly remembered. But it was a burden I willingly took on, because for the first time in years, my actions were driven by her happiness, not my own. As I pulled into the driveway, the familiar colonial house seemed to shimmer in the afternoon light. It was no longer a stage for my carefully constructed lie, but a sanctuary. A place where a woman was healing, and a man was, for the first time in a long time, trying to be truly honest with himself. Mrs. Henderson was in the living room, reading a magazine while Rachel sat by the window, a sketch pad in her lap. Her eyes, usually clouded with confusion, were focused, intent. She wasn't sketching a landscape or a still life. She was drawing the gnarled oak tree in our front yard, its branches reaching towards the sky. It was raw, powerful, filled with an unpretentious beauty. This was the Rachel Mark had seen, the one I had ignored. "Greg, you're back," Rachel called out, her face lighting up with a genuine smile. It wasn't the tentative, polite smile of recent weeks. It was open, warm, a reflection of the peace she now felt. "Look, I was trying to draw that old tree. Does it look right?" I walked over, my heart aching with a mixture of sorrow and a strange, nascent hope. I looked at her drawing, then at the tree outside. "It's perfect, Rach," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "You've really got a talent there." And I meant it. No patronizing, "looks good." No dismissive dabbling, just genuine admiration. She beamed, a flush of pleasure rising on her cheeks. "Really? You think so?" "Absolutely," I said, reaching out to gently touch her hand. This time, there was no flinch, no distance. She leaned into my touch. "You know, you always had a knack for it. Even when we first met. You'd doodle on napkins at the diner." I was pulling from our earliest memories, the true ones, before the rot had set in. And this time, it felt less like deception and more like an effort to connect with a genuine part of her that I had forgotten or willfully ignored. That evening, a quiet transformation began. I didn't burn the diary. I put it back in the drawer, but not in the secret place. I placed it openly, beneath a stack of old photos, where she might one day rediscover it, should fate deem it so. The choice would be hers, if and when she was ready. My job wasn't to hide the truth forever, but to allow her the space and strength to eventually confront it on her own terms. My interactions with Rachel shifted, the forced nostalgia, the relentless curation of our past, began to give way to genuine curiosity about her present thoughts, her current feelings. I stopped talking at her, stopped dictating her memories, and started listening. Really listening. I asked her about her day, about the books she was reading. I'd even bought her some new ones, based on the authors she used to like, not just the ones I liked. I stopped bringing up our songs and asked her what music made her feel good now. It was difficult. It meant confronting my own ingrained habits of control, of self-centeredness. It meant learning to truly see her, not as a reflection of my own desires, but as an independent, complex woman. I talked less about my work and more about her art, her thoughts, her emotions. I discovered a newfound patience, a quiet tenderness I thought I'd lost years ago. The happy ending was not guaranteed. Her memory might never return. She might live out her days believing in the perfect marriage I had initially tried to fabricate. Or one day, she might stumble upon that diary or encounter Mark by chance, and the full, devastating truth would crash down on her. But I was ready. I was ready for whatever came. Because the journey through her amnesia, through her diary, through my confrontation with Mark, had done something far more profound than just save a marriage. It had, in a way, saved me. It had stripped away the layers of self-deception, of arrogance, of blindness, and revealed the monster beneath. And then, it had offered me a chance, not to erase that monster, but to confront him, to understand him, and to slowly, painfully, begin the work of building a better man. I wasn't the same Greg McCormick who walked into St. Jude's Hospital weeks ago, clinging to the hope of a second chance at a convenient lie. I was a man forged in the fires of truth, humbled by my failures, and committed, for the first time in a long time, to genuine love, whatever form it might take. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But for today, as Rachel smiled at me across the dinner table, a real, unburdened smile, I knew I was finally, truly seeing her. And I was Finally, truly seeing myself.